Welcome to the webinar, The Importance of Communication Skills, a Residency Program Director's Perspective. Hi, I'm Barbara Lewis, the Managing Editor of .com, an online communication skills learning system for medical schools, residency, PA, and NP programs, and also hospitals now that .com offers over 40 CME credits. This webinar is going to last about 30 minutes, and the recording and the PowerPoint will be available shortly. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box located in the panel. And if we don't have a chance to answer your questions during the webinar, we will respond afterwards. So I'm very excited today because joining me is Dr. Jim Kruer. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Barbara. Good to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm an internal medicine program director. I have a background in sort of starting a new residency. I was first program director for a residency in Michigan, and spent about 5.5 years working on building and designing a brand new residency for internal medicine, and have previous experiences with managing resident clinic and quite a few years of work in communication skills as well as in EMRs and quality and safety.
Great. Great. You have a very comprehensive background, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us today. So what would you say are some of the most important communication skills for residents or physicians in general?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of different skills, and I tend to start with just the whole concept of emotional intelligence. I think that what most program directors are looking for and what most patients are looking for in their doctors is that you have a good sense of emotional IQ, that you can sort of sense that something's wrong, maybe pick up on a hidden agenda item that the patient may have. I think we're in general looking for team player doctors, so having good communication skills within multidisciplinary teams. Those are some of the things that I think are really important for the verbal communications. And then I think we also, as program directors, look for good qualities in written communication skills, and particularly in today's age where we have EMRs now that patients can log in themselves and look at notes, and they the residents and physicians are now messaging patients directly with their labs and other communications electronically. We're always looking for good written communication skills also.
So you mentioned emotional intelligence. And so how would you gauge a candidate's skills, communication skills in general, but let's say emotional intelligence skills in an interview?
Well, that's probably the thing we do the most. If I had my sort of rating as to how many things we look at on an interview day, but really how we judge it is based on connection with the people that the candidate is interviewing with. It actually starts with the coordinator for the residency, because usually you're communicating with that coordinator to set up the meeting and to make all the arrangements for the actual interview day. So I think the coordinator is already judging emotional intelligence, and I think you know, when you come in on the first handshake, are you warm and pleasant, and do you have connection skills with the people you shake hands with? But in our interview days, we would have 3 interviews, one with the program director, usually a chief resident, and then one with a faculty member, and all of those folks are judging your connection and warmth and your ability to read emotion. And then we usually have a lunch with residents, and they also get a chance to sort of make an assessment as to how well you're connecting. And so these are just a few of the ways that we assess emotional IQ.
Very interesting. So how about, let's say you're at lunch or in the interview, what are some of the questions that you ask the candidates around this topic, besides their clinical skills, of course?
Sure. Well, Usually we'll ask what we call behavioral interviewing questions. So we'll ask for actual examples of tell us about a time when you had a difficult patient and or an angry family member, and how did you deal with that situation. We'll ask for examples around maybe a time when somebody didn't come through on a project that you were supposed to complete in med school, or tell us about a time when there was a conflict and how did you handle it. So we're really looking to hear stories, and we're listening to those stories around, how did you to turn a difficult situation into something positive and still make the outcome happen.
So when you're talking with a candidate, what are the characteristics that you've seen in the past that actually diminish a candidate's chances for your selection?
There are a few, but the one that stands out the most in my mind is being unable to roll with resistance, and that's a term that we hear taught a lot in motivational interviewing. But I've seen a few candidates come through that just kind of want to sort of, they're either too critical, or they're too negative, or they're unable to sort of let their own sort of stake in the ground go for the good of the group. And I'll give a couple of examples. I was a program director at a community hospital, and one applicant came through, and every question she asked was, so you don't have bench research, and you don't have this, or you don't have that, and it just sort of gave a negative energy overall throughout the whole interview day, that she wasn't going to be a great fit for us because of the way in which she was asking the questions and the tone of voice that she was using. We could tell she was probably better suited for a more academic university program. And another example is we do an activity during our interview afternoon where we ask the applicants to do it's really a team communication exercise where they're asked to build a consensus list. And I've had a few people that just really inhibited the group because they really thought this should be this way, and they could only see it from their perspective. And so because they weren't really able to sort of roll with resistance or listen to alternative suggestions from the other applicants, it made for a difficult situation, and we just decided that those two folks weren't really exactly what we wanted in the residency. So there are various times that you'll get to see that, yeah.
I've never heard of that term, roll with resistance. So that means that people need to sort of acclimate themselves to a situation that may not be going in their direction?
Not necessarily that you have to agree to go along with it, but I think it's important to be skillful at asking. In my current program, we actually call it Ask Clarifying Questions, and so we'll say, may I ask a clarifying question, and then you're really looking to see if the doctor can seek to understand someone else's perspective first, and then sort of explain their position.
I see. Okay. So now let's say you've hired somebody. In your experience, what are some of the biggest ways that residents fail in their responsibilities?
Well, the interesting question, I don't know if residents ever fail in their responsibilities because they are in a training program, so we aren't expecting perfection. I think we find, though, that interns do get into some challenging situations, and I think one of the first things they get challenged by is usually in July when they first start. They're still brand new to the system, and yet the patients and the families of the patients think that they've been there forever, and so they're often in a difficult situation of having to answer questions and get answers for the families and patients when they themselves are still learners. And so that's challenging. And I think not recognizing when to ask your superiors or not asking soon enough for help is one situation where I've seen interns get into difficult situations. And as soon as that happens, then people start to make assumptions that maybe they're, failing in some way, or, overconfident.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you had a couple of candidates where it was not a good fit. Can you tell us about what impressed you with some candidates, the most impressive that you've met?
Absolutely. So the ones who really impress, I think, come across as very polished and organized. They come across typically with some clear communication around what they're looking to achieve in the training program. I think great applicants also come across with a sense of humility and willingness to learn. I think also great applicants generally share some sort of an ambition story. So they are giving an impression or an aura that they're a go-getter, and that they're ready to work hard and dig in and take on the next challenge in their training program.
Mm-hmm. We have students listening today from the Elam Medical School in Cuba, and these are U.S. students, and I wanted to ask you a couple of questions specific to them. They're very unique, and compared to other medical students in IM residency programs, or interviewing for an IM residency program, how would you suggest that students from Elam sort of sell themselves to the typical residency program director who's never heard of Elam and maybe never been to Cuba?
Mm-hmm. Well, a very unique and different sort of a niche question, but it is actually an important one because one of the things that you have to think about as an applicant is, does the program director need orienting in any way? And I think you may find yourself in this situation having to orient the program director as well as perhaps the other interviewers in the interview day as to what Elam is and what's the training consist of in Cuba. One of the difficulties of being a residency program director is that we get applicants from the entire globe, and every single country has something unique about the way they do training. And since the program director themselves has not done training in all those countries, a lot of times international grads have to explain what that training consisted of. So be prepared to describe that training program. I think another thing you have to think about coming from an outside the U.S. System is that you have to convince the program director that you understand the system of U.S. healthcare enough to be proficient on day one in the residency. So I always counsel my residents that, what I'm doing is, as a program director, is trying to train you to be a well-rounded physician. And I always explain by showing them a pie chart that's divided into 3 equal sections. And I say one section is your medical knowledge and skills, and that's why you're in residency, is to learn those. Another third of that pie is communication skills, because all residencies and hospitals are graded and marked now for how well do we communicate. And the other third of that pie is how well do you understand the system of healthcare. And sometimes I call that the business of medicine. How does the system see patients, make money, communicate with patients, etc.? Because a lot of the interactions that doctors have is with helping patients navigate the healthcare system. And I think particularly if you're coming from Cuba or Elam, you're going to have to sort of show the program director that you understand the U.S. system of healthcare enough to help a patient who says something like, can you help me with a prior authorization for this service that I need? Or I was denied my prescription because it's a tier 3 instead of tier 1. And so these may be foreign terms to you, but they're things that, when you're put into the residency on July 1st, you're going to be in clinic and you're going to have patients ask you these kinds of questions. And so showing the program director that you've had some experience in the U.S. system is very helpful. And again, we don't expect perfection, but the people who are going to be more preferred are people who are ready to go and in the U.S. system.
So would you recommend that rather than leaving it just to the conversation, that the information about ELAMBI or any school outside the U.S. and a particular training program be written in the application somewhere?
I would love to see something like that, actually. I'd maybe consider putting it in the personal statement. Doesn't need to take up much space, but maybe just a little bit of explanation about, how that system works and how you how much you learn there. You'll also
Okay.
may find a chance when you fill out your ERAS application uh, under sections like volunteerism or work experience. There's usually a little place to write a paragraph explanation, and I think it could be helpful to put a few more descriptive words in those sections. For instance, if you volunteered with an underserved community or you ran a clinic for uninsured patients in Cuba, I would say, describe that a little more and instead of just saying it in like one sentence. Give a little embellishment to that, and it'll help the program director understand better the system in which you are working.
What do you think is your biggest challenge in terms of recruiting new interns?
Well, there are a few of them, but the biggest one for me is filtering 4,000 applications to find the best applicants.
Oh my
And
gosh, 4,000? How do you even do that?
well, this is why I think it's really important for students to understand the perspective of the residency, because a lot of students are basically applying broadly, meaning they're applying to as many programs as they can possibly afford through ERAS, and on the receiving end of all those applications is it really literally comes down to, I think I had 4,000 applications for 13 spots. And so what happens is in ERAS on the program side, we can filter, so we can say that we only want to see students, for instance, with a score above 240, or we can filter for above 220. And that's just an example, but we can set filters to say things like we only want students who have volunteer experience or work experience. And so there are these, ERAS allows us to sort of select what types of things we want to see, and therefore we can, pull the students' applications forward who have the most well-rounded ERAS applications. So that's how we get started with it, but then it's just purely reading, and it's going through an electronic system and reading as much as you can, and we typically divide that work up amongst the assistant program director and the program director, and we start trying to find the folks who we think are the best fit for our program. It's quite cumbersome, actually.
Oh, I can't even imagine, right? So what does the ideal candidate look like to you, and what would be some of the key traits? I know you mentioned that you would score ERAS a certain way, but anything else come to mind besides the grades or the marks, the numbers?
Well, I think, your best first impression is really going to come from that personal statement. The personal statement is probably what we tend to read and, look at heavily when deciding if you're going to get an invitation to an interview. So I think really, spending some time focusing on making that a great personal statement, and I emphasize the word personal because I see some misses on those at times where people they spend more time talking about what medicine is or what they believe the specialty is, when really I want to be hearing a lot more about you as a person and more about your values and your life lessons and things that you've learned over time. And so that personal statement, if it's done well and it creates a feeling of warm, fuzzy, this guy or this lady sounds like an awesome doctor or a great student, I think it helps get you that first invitation to the interview. Again, there are a variety of things, though. I like to break it down into 6 areas of what I'm looking for. One is integrity. That's, I'm looking for honesty and sincerity in this application. I'm looking for motivation, so I think it should show that you're excited about the specialty you're applying to. I'm looking for, do you have the capacity to do a great job? So it's stories or small snippets about things that you learned or did through patient experiences. I'm looking to see if you understand what the medicine or the specialty you're applying to entails and why you know that you're a great fit for that specialty. And I think other than that, it's knowledge, which we can look at from transcripts and scores, and experience, which we don't expect to see a ton of because most students have been to college and then med school and don't have a ton of work experience. So we're not really looking for tons of experience in the application. But we're looking really heavily at that personal statement to see if they have that warmth and motivation and connectivity, and they really have done their homework and understand what the specialty is all about that they're applying to.
This is certainly great advice, and I know that you mentioned the value of communication, and in fact the patient satisfaction scores that you mentioned are now mandated by the government if a hospital system receives money from the government, which nearly every hospital does, and money is attached to that. And somebody was telling me the other day that the hospital left millions of dollars on the table because their scores were low, and analysis of the patient satisfaction survey showing that the communication dimensions are the drivers of those scores. So I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about .com and the importance of communication skills, which help improve medical outcomes and decrease malpractice claims, enhance physician-provider satisfaction. And here's the HCAP surveys that I just mentioned, which is the patient satisfaction surveys. So the alum students receive a free .com subscription, and this would be really helpful, I think, for your Step 2 CS and also for your upcoming residency interviews. A little bit of background about us. We were started in 2003, and we obtained a grant from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, and we were launched as a nonprofit in 2006, and we have continuing medical education as of 2015. So 6 journal articles have been written about the value of .com. We have over 90 institutions that subscribe, and we're located now in 14 countries. Here's some journal articles about the value of .com. So let me just give you an overview. We have the module authors or leading faculty, 42 online modules, each about an hour in length. And some of those modules Dr. Kruer mentioned. For example, we have a team module. We have a module that can test your empathy. And we have another module on dealing with emotional patients and family members, how to handle that. So we have quite a few really great modules, 42 of them, over 400 videos. We have annotated interactive videos, which I'll mention in just a minute, and then we have all these faculty resources. Plenty of testimonials, which you can read on our website. And just to give you a brief tour, we have starting off with our basic modules on mindfulness and balance and self-care, therapeutic aspects of medical encounters. The next are the most closely aligned with the patient satisfaction surveys. And then we go into advanced elements such as responding to strong emotions, shared decision-making, and then communicating in specific situations such as delivering bad news. And I know that Interns are often asked to deliver bad news and may not be adept at doing this. So we have a module on how to do it, the 6 steps, and then communicating with colleagues. And here we have our team module on communication in healthcare teams and effective clinical teaching, the oral presentation as well. So the modules are consistent in their format. We start with a rationale. We have key concepts, learning goals, and lots of videos. We start off with the patient's view. Then we go to the doctor's view of what's going to be happening during the exam, what, in this case, his goal is. We have reflection questions, key principles, learning goals, and then lots of content. And we have a ton of literature references, so we're not just saying that we think you should do this because, but rather here's most effective practices and here's what are proven techniques. So our annotated videos go through and highlight what the physician and the patient and family are talking about. And then if you click on this little icon right here, out pops the clinician or the patient talking about why he's mentioning this particular subject, what's in the back of his mind, and what he's doing. And our learners in our surveys love the videos and these annotated videos as well, because it really helps them to model what they should be doing. So this is our empathy understanding in Module 6. I've taken this several times, and each time I am better at recognizing a place in a conversation where an empathic comment should be made. Oftentimes learners think that we shouldn't open the Pandora's box by saying anything that is empathic because it's going to take a lot of time. Research has actually proved exactly the opposite, that a patient will keep saying the same thing over and over again, waiting for that empathic comment. So what happens with this is you just go through, you listen to the conversation, and you check on places where you think an empathic comment can be made. As I say, I've taken this several times, and each time I get better. Here, this is recognizing facial emotions, and you click on what the emotion is, and it gets faster and faster so that you become pretty adept at recognizing an emotion right away. Here are 5 substance abusers, including a physician, answering 21 questions about how they got started and what happened to them and what the impact was. And this is to help learners recognize the fact that it's just not about getting off and not abusing anymore, that there's a lot more going on here. A lot of checklists. This one, for example, delivering bad news. So if you have to deliver bad news, you can bring up on an app that will help you to recognize what you need to do first, second, and third, for example. So that is basically everything about .com. I would recommend that since you're getting a free subscription, that you use it and that you mention this in your personal statement that you have completed the .com 42 modules, or however many that you have completed, and for communication skills, which is 42 hours of learning and instruction. So Dr. Kruer, what would you say about putting something like that in the personal statement?
I think that's awesome. Again, going back to what I'd said earlier, if I am looking to assess an applicant, I'm looking for medical knowledge, but also communication skills and system-based care. And I think just it adds reassurance to the program director that you've had additional extra training in those areas, which are fantastic skills to bring to a residency.
And 1/3 of your pie that you have is communication skills. Is that right?
That's right. So this would be
very
a
important.
really extra boost to your application.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today on this very important topic, and thank you to everyone who has joined us. The recording and the PowerPoint will be available very shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara.